Before I continue, we have to talk about what is actually risk communication. As a research area, risk communication can include everything from risk to crisis and disaster. It can include research on different actors and their understanding and behavior to organizations and their communication needs and communication models, and from individuals to social perspectives. So as you can hear, it is something with a very broad definition. Well, when you're doing research, you need to be more narrow. So we have used a definition of risk communication that includes communication about possible crises that the public may be exposed to and communicated by public bodies or commissioned by public bodies, and where the recipient is the public. And as I said earlier, the content of risk communication, it may vary. For example, based on the different climatic conditions of countries. So in that sense, we could say that risk communication is influenced by the context. And communication processes can, of course, be summed up by the classic question, who says what to whom, how and to what effect? So risk communication is also influenced by the norms and perceptions of the intended recipient. And the sender, of course, has an agenda behind the communication. The sender wants to accomplish something. And that, of course, affects how the risk communication is designed. Well, this image is from an Estonian YouTube video from the Estonian Rescue Board, the Päästjaamet. So, if we look very more closely at the risks that are communicated in these countries, there are many common denominators. So, in all countries, we communicate on hazards that are related to weather, to natural phenomena. What phenomenon it is, however, it differs between the countries. So you have snow in the Nordic countries, storms perhaps in all countries, floods, particularly in France, as well as landslides and forest fires. In addition, there is also communication about societal crisis. There may be dangerous emissions from involving both heavy duty tankers and radioactive material accidents. War and terrorism is also something that occurs in some countries' risk communication. Terrorist attack, especially in France, which a country that has suffered several terrorist attacks in recent years, and also in Cyprus, that is partially occupied by Turkey. But war and terrorism doesn't occur at all in the Estonian risk communication. If we go down one level to the home, well, home is missing on this slide, but there are two risks that are communicated in a number of countries, and that is fire and extended power outages. Fire in the home is, for example, more common in Estonia than in the Nordic countries. In 2015, it was only 7 days during the year that the Estonian emergency services did not have to extinguish a fire in a building. And these fires very often depend on poorly installed power lines. At the individual level, there are primarily risks related to the use of alcohol and the use of alcohol in connection to water. It can be swimming or going in a boat when you have used alcohol, but also activities on weak ices during the winter. And these risks are mainly communicated in Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. In England, in particular, they have adopted a more general approach, which is called an all hazards approach, which is more focused on how to deal with the consequences of different hazards. If we move on and look at the content of the risk communication, the starting point is that the public receives information about a potential risk, and that the sender wants the public to act in different ways to reduce the risk or to mitigate the consequences of the potential crisis. It may be that the public should take preventive measures. An example of this is a fire safety campaign that started in Estonia in 2014, where people can go to a web page to get help with home security measures to reduce the risk of fires. So this may be another very current example of the home emergency kit is the home emergency kits that the populations in Sweden, Germany, Finland and France are encouraged to prepare. And finally, in many cases, risk communication is also about informing how the population should act in the event of a crisis occurring. To the left in this picture, you will see an example of such risk communication. This is from French authorities who inform the public about how to act in case there is an emission of toxic gas. And this poster is distributed, or it's posted in different public buildings, so that people who come into the building can see that, okay, or some of them they may pass without noticing it, but it is part of a mission to increase public awareness by posting it in public buildings. If we look on how the message is communicated, we have to think about risk communication as something that is strategic in shape. There is a clear purpose of the communication, and the sender must know what should be achieved. And both the content, what to communicate and how to communicate must be considered if you want to reach the intended audience. So Sweden is the only country out of those that we studied that carried out a campaign where material was sent out to all households in the country. But on the other hand, there were also other countries that had campaigns, even though it was not involving printed material that was sent out. For example, Estonia had the fire safety campaign. Finland also has a 72-hour campaign that started in 2017, as you all may know. Otherwise, it is mainly the government's web pages that contain, or government or other authorities in each country that contain the most comprehensive information about potential risks and crisis. But for that information requires a committed citizen that is actually and actively looking for the information. There are many such citizens, but not all citizens. That doesn't apply to the entire population. But dissemination of risk and crisis communication is also made through social media, especially Facebook and Twitter, and also on YouTube. You can see several government agencies in these countries have YouTube channels where they are distributing this kind of information. Sweden, Germany, England have mobile apps that provide information on potential risks and ongoing crises in various ways. And they're also giving recommendations to the populations on how to prepare and act in different situations through these mobile apps. France used to have one, but they recently closed it down, and they are instead diffusing information if there is a crisis occurring through text messages. In some countries like Cyprus, there are civic offices where the public can turn to receive information, and volunteers can also register there to assist in both preventive work and crisis work. In France, there are also, as I mentioned before, posters that are published in public places. You can see the one on the top row in the middle is information on how you should act in case of a terrorist attack. And this poster is, it's posted at municipal offices, universities, shopping centers, public buildings, and so on. And many countries also have printed materials that are distributed through municipalities and other authorities or organizations. One of the more unusual ways of communicating risks is carried out in Estonia, where the rescue services are they're visiting people in their homes in order to help them to fireproof their homes. And in 2016, the Estonian Rescue Services had conducted 17,000 such home consultations. Another interesting example is the Finnish 72 Hours campaign, where trainings or workshops are carried out by people from different NGOs. These workshops, as you know, focus on home preparedness. Yes, and I also already mentioned different focused campaigns like this one and the Crisis Preparedness Week in Sweden. But it's also important to notice that not all of the population take part of the message in the same way. If you do not master the language that is used in risk communication, it is very difficult to know what to expect and how to act during a crisis. Most countries that we studied, they offer some kind of information in English, although it's not often very detailed. In those countries that are multilingual, the information in the minority language is often abbreviated, and not all information is translated to the minority language. Greece, that is a country with many tourists, they offer some risk information apart from Greek and English, also in French, Spanish, Arabic, and Albanian. In Sweden, if you go to sites such as Din Säkerhet, for example, and the YouTube channel of the MSB, the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, you can often use Google Translate when you want to access information that is only published in Swedish. But the quality of this translation is often substandard, and it varies from confusing to funny in some cases. So in our research group, we have a very broad linguistic competence, and we have tried out this translation in order to see how the message, how well the message worked out, or how actually it was distorted many times and became incomprehensible. So I used Google Translate when I watched some YouTube videos from the Estonian Rescue Board, the Päästeamet, and I could understand some of it from my limited but basic knowledge of Estonian, and of course I watched the pictures and so on. But when I read the text that was produced by Google Translate, this video was about Cuban cigars. And of course it wasn't, because it was about how to fireproof your home. This is something to really keep in mind when you want to reach the entire population with an important message. Because as many people as possible must given the best possible opportunities to understand the message and to be able to make informed decisions about how to prepare and how to act. You can see it as a democratic mission to disperse as much information as possible to as many as possible. But in the end, it can also be a question about equal chances of survival. The target group in these countries is most often men and women of working age without functional variation, or what do you usually say, disability. France has one YouTube video for those who use sign language. Otherwise, we haven't found any information in these countries targeting these groups. Some countries also offer information specifically targeting children in order to increase child safety. It can be videos on fire safety or water safety. Okay, now let's see. But in summary, in this study, we have shown some common trends throughout these 8 countries. So first of all, we can see in all these countries that there is a recent shift from focus on risk to focus on security. In other words, it's a greater focus on impact rather than on the risks. At the same time, we can see a shift of positions where responsibility is shifted from the public to the individual. The image in the middle here, it comes also from the Estonian Rescue Board, and about a video about the Rescue Board's new strategy. And it says in this video that your most important role is to start seeing yourself as your own savior. So there is a transfer of responsibility to the individual, but that also requires that individuals have the ability to understand, have the ability to act, and in many cases also have the financial resources to procure and maintain all the material that they need for their own and their family's safety. And in some countries, such as Sweden and Germany, the time that people should manage to secure food, water, and heating for themselves is quite long. In several of the countries, we can also see a commercialization of security. For example, we can now buy water, canned water, with a guaranteed shelf life of 50 years. So this water will be proper for drinking for 50 years. From Germany, you can order an emergency kit with food that lasts, food for 1 month, and you can keep it, and the food will be proper to eat for 30 years. Some things to consider. You may question, why is it important to know how risks are communicated in different countries? Well, of course, it's important because we can use it as inspiration, but we need to know it also if we want to collaborate. But something important to consider is that the entire population cannot be reached by the same message used diffused by one single channel. So one challenge is how we should reach the entire population and how we can do it in a well-balanced way so that people, for example, don't become scared instead of acting. We don't want to create scenarios where people during times of crisis lock up in their homes, become isolated, and are afraid to share and help others. Another challenge is to design risk communication so that it contributes to increased solidarity and cooperation. So the image to the right is an image that people in our project group, we loved it. It's from the Finnish campaign because in this campaign, people are encouraged to ensure that other people than the closest family have the most necessary things if there is a serious societal crisis. And if we want to create a more resilient society, I believe that the opportunities for doing that are better if we collaborate and do things together. So I have 7 more minutes, and I will very briefly just talk about a few projects that we are doing that are very much connected to risk communication and home preparedness, so that you know what is going on actually. I'm managing a project that is funded by the Swedish civil contingencies that is called From Communication to Action in Heterogeneous Societies, Understanding and Implementing Risk Communication in Practice. I am studying how different groups of recipients of risk communication in heterogeneous societies, such as Sweden, how they understand and act in relation to risk communication. So first of all, I'm studying how people actually understand and interpret risk communication, and what information and what channels that are important for citizens to take action in related to the communicated crisis. And secondly, I'm also interested to know how people intend to act in the event of a crisis before it has occurred, and how they later on act when the crisis occurs. So you can ask someone how, if there is a power outage during a week, how do you intend to act? So they will probably answer something, they will have an already made answer. But when this power outage occurs, how will they actually act? Perhaps a power outage is not the best example, but I'm intending to use our lab that I talked about later, and people will actually be exposed to certain events, and then they will be asked questions on what are you going to do now. For example, there's an earthquake, or there's an emission of toxic gas or something, and you're in this gas. You can smell it, and you can see it. Perhaps you cannot, in different ways. And then you get a question: how will you act now? And why is this good to use that kind of methods? Because the real crisis doesn't have to occur before I can study it. I can study it in this experimental way in the RCR lab. I don't have to expose people to real dangers. And that will give us knowledge about how people have actually internalized risk communication, how they understood it, and how they are actually acting when the crisis occurs. Then I have a colleague, Linda Kvarnlöf. She intended to be here with me today, but unfortunately she couldn't join me. She also has a project funded by the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agencies, where she studied household preparedness in everyday practices. So she wants to investigate how different households understand the crisis preparedness, and she's doing interviews in both rural and urban areas of Sweden. This project started about 2 years ago. I know she's not finished with it yet. It's still ongoing. And one of the preliminary results is that there are many people who are already prepared. Their household has a good preparedness, but they don't talk about it. They don't think about it as preparedness. If you live in a rural area, perhaps you have a distance to the closest grocery store, then perhaps you go shopping once a week, so you always have food stored for at least a week. Perhaps you have your own water supply. Perhaps if you live in the countryside, if you're a farmer, you have some additional energy resources, and so on. So it's actually practices that you carry out in your everyday life, and you don't think about it as preparedness for a crisis. And not only Linda, but also in other research projects, we found out that there are differences between rural and urban populations when it comes to household preparedness, and trust in authorities and other organizations and how they will act during a crisis. People in urban areas, they expect more of authorities during crisis than what urban populations do. Finally, we also have a collaborative project between Swedish and Norwegian and Icelandic partners called Home Risks, about risk management strategies when households face collapsing electricity and digital infrastructure. This project is finished, and you can actually, I think, download the final report if you go into our web pages. I will show you some addresses very soon. I know that at the closure of this project, they inaugurated an exhibition about household preparedness at the Norwegian Museum of Science and Technology. Yes, it's 13:59, and I just want to finish with saying that you're welcome to visit us. Even if you cannot come to Sweden to visit us, you can go to mion.se/RCR, or you can go directly to the RCR lab as well.
Thank you.